if you think of a Brexit, in our days, there certainly there is an ancient Brexit mentality, which was those days, you know, an Brexit against the Roman Catholic Church of those days. Now, before actually, because you see, we take as the Reformation has started 500 years ago, and that's kind of, it's been nailed down. The day that Martin Luther nailed down this thesis in the cathedral, in the doors of the cathedral, that's the beginning of the Reformation. So we are celebrating, or last year throughout Europe, somewhere more and somewhere less, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. As a matter of fact, the Reformation with Luther was just as the continuation of the Reformation that had already started. And truthfully, most of it started with the royal family already time ago, and also then with the translation of the Bible by John Wycliffe. And from John Wycliffe, then connected to Jan Hus in Prague, it was the beginning of the whole Reformation in Europe, which is just a few years before. But with the pre-Reformation, obviously in different circumstances, but that it wasn't like an open door to Reformation, which will continue then with what we know now, the great Reformers, Luther, Zwingli, and Calvin and others. But you see, John Wycliffe, he started with translation of the Bible with the modern or with the Middle English. Believing that everybody should be able to read the Bible in their own language. Now, there was already like a spread of the mentality actually going in various parts, but quite sporadically. Another great philosopher was a Czech who was a priest, who was a philosopher, who was a dean, and who was quite well known in his part of the world, and that's Jan Hus. Now, through Queen Anna, they had the connections, and the writings of John Wycliffe spread to his part of the world, and then basically, to me, that is the beginning of the Reformation. Now, the teaching of Jan Hus in those days was very precisely and a lot against the priesthood and the authority of the priest in a church. That the whole authority is actually of the Bible, and he believed and he preached that was taken by the priests, and therefore this is what he preached to his students, but obviously not so. It didn't go so far from there. Now, then this is where we continue from there. Obviously now to go straight to what we call the Reformation, the 500th anniversary. Now, just to give you a brief idea, in here, I've deliberately brought this logo because in Kosovo last year we celebrated the 500th anniversary with activities of 1 week long, and it was symposiums, and we were very honored to have people like Charlie, people like David Hosafluk, who exposed to all the people everything, the impact of Reformation. And for the whole week, you know, we managed, I think, to influence the media. We managed to influence the political community, as well as the civil society. But going back to how was really Europe, what was going on in those days? Obviously, I'm here to talk about the Eastern Europe, and frankly, I don't know where the Eastern Europe is or where it starts. But we're going to presume it's all there where it was a former communist bloc. And then this is how we've divided that politically, or somebody decided to divide it that politically. But those days, it's very important to know that as Reformation was spreading through the Western Europe, countries that were also quite impacted by the Reformation primarily were the Czech Republic, the Hungary, Ukraine, and Romania. In other parts of the world, that was dominated by the Ottoman Empire, that came much slower and much more difficult. Noel Malcolm, a British historian who wrote two his masterpieces, you know, a short history of Bosnia and a short history of Kosovo, he points out that during the Reformation time, there was a Protestant mission to that part of the world. So there were actually some sporadic works. We see the translation of, in Kosovo, for instance, which was totally under the dominance of Ottoman Empire. We see the translation of some Bible materials in the Albanian language, like in 1555 and so on. So it's the effects of the Reformation that hit that part of the world as well, but very, very sporadic. Now, as the Reformation was spreading in that part of the world, it's very important for us to know that actually reformers, they were facing, wherever they went, it was different situation. While, let's say, in Germany, they knew what they were facing, it's a Roman Catholic Church. In the East, it was totally different. It was totally a mix-up from country to country or from a nation to nation. If they went to Ukraine, they faced the Orthodoxy. If they went to Hungary, they would face the Catholicism. If they went further down to the Balkans, they faced Islam. So it's a total mixture, and actually the response is different. This is why I have brought this quotation here. Calvin, he would say, like, pagan and papal Roman Empire together with the Eastern Roman Empire and Islam represent the two horns of the Antichrist and the fourth beast of Daniel 7. Now, this is not an expository preaching. It's not meant to be like that. But if you go there, you're going to see actually, you know, how Daniel in his dream, he has all the dreams and he explains it. Like God has given all the dreams. And the reformers are thinking, actually, and are preaching and teaching that those horns are found right in the eastern part of those days Europe. And Islam was one horn, Orthodoxy was another, and the Holy Roman Empire was yet another. So really, they had encountered a big problematic aspect of spreading their doctrine. Now, obviously, there were no political territories like you would have with the Orthodoxy and with Islam and with the Roman Catholic Church. You know, they were fighting, and their fight was for a territory, and one of the first things they would do is, in there, they would plant a political religious building, and then they would move on and claim that as their own land. With the Reformation, it was a different mentality. They were opposing those things, but now I believe those things, because they opposed it, they did not fight for political territory, it actually did not help so much the spread of Reformation in the East. I have listed here this region where we are talking about. I wrote there, has been shaped by a clash of Eastern and Western cultures. I believe, you know, we're talking of the part of the world that is found in the east of the West and on the west of the East. And as such, it had so many times clashes of civilizations happening right there. Through this part of the world, if you're thinking of the Balkans, for instance, during the divide of the Christian church between the Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholicism, actually it went right through the Balkans, making people of the same nation sometimes fighting between one another. One camp being with the Greek Orthodoxy, the other one being with the Roman Catholicism, and then fighting each other right through their own lands. So these are what I think, how it has been shaped. The Pope and the Patriarchs, definitely. Then it's the Mongolian Empire, which also it helped shaping the cultures of our part of the world, the Ottoman Empire, the Christian West. Then obviously it's the democratic powers and totalitarian powers later on. And obviously finally is what we know the former communist bloc, which is, it was all the way from covering far most of the Eastern Europe. I know that you will always raise the flag there when I'm done, but with Charlie early on, I said that's a mistake when you give a mic to a preacher. Now, briefly, I'll go through some of the aspects here. Now, I mentioned early on how reformers, they were facing, in different nations, they were facing different problems. With Hungary, for instance, it was, Hungary was a lot attacked by the Ottomans, and they actually they managed to conquer a big part of their land. The Reformation was spreading, and people were actually endorsing it, but the authorities of those days were crushing all the time. Any of the reformers, any of the Reformation was being crushed by the rulers of those days. Now, this is then when, it's quite ironical to say, but when the Ottoman Empire came and when they conquered a part of Hungary, it helped actually the development of religious freedom because the Hungarian Empire those days could not fight in both fronts. So therefore, it opened up toward the reformers. Actually, Luther, he thinks Ottoman Empire was a punishment for the Hungarians because they were crushing the reformers or the Reformation Church. Now, this is a quote, and again, you can feel free to use it and find it, obviously. But those days, the reason I also mention Hungary is because it controlled a substantial area of the Balkans. Now the territory is much smaller, but those days, you see, the reason why, for instance, we have Reformation much stronger in northern Serbia and Vojvodina is because of the connections with Hungary. Why there is a Reformation spreading in certain part of Romania is because also of the spread those days. So we're talking of a Hungary, a quite large territory of those days, and as such, it actually helped for the Reformation to spread much more. Now, in there, when it comes, what impact did it actually have? It's very important among the in Hungary, among the Hungarians, Reformation helped them a lot in the growth of their national identity and in their struggle to fight the Islam. This is where Catholicism or the belief in Catholicism failed, and then obviously you're going to find different people writing different things about how many people turned. But by 1600, you have between 60% and 90% of the Hungarians converting to Protestantism. And as a result, that helped them. One of the major things which you're going to see in Hungary is the printing houses and the education, which is opposite to what happened in Poland, because this helped when the Counter-Reformation hit. Actually, they were much stronger to continue with the Reformation, while in Poland, the absence of theological education and of schools and of printing houses, the Counter-Reformation was much more effective in this part of the world. And by the way, this is where Jesuits first invaded the idea of spreading their doctrine through education. And it came right from the time when reformers were doing exactly the same thing. So Hungary is a typical example, spreading of education and educating the entire nation with literature and with schools. Poland is a different story. It's very interesting to see how in here, a Reformation was embraced much more by the elites, by the princes and by the rulers. But it's very, very interesting to see how, in Poland, the reformers did not focus, like in Hungary, did not focus so much in education and in providing schools and providing theology. as much as they provided in Hungary. And I believe that is as a consequence of that, when the Counter-Reformation hit, then the Jesuits found that as a vacuum in the society, and they came in and they penetrated with their schools. When they came with their schools, some of the princes who had converted into Protestantism those days, they were hesitant to send their children to the Jesuit schools. But then they came to all the Protestant villages and told them, listen, we will never convert your children. You just bring them to the education. Truthfully, history shows that all the children who went through Jesuit schools, they came out as strong Catholics. One of the great figures of the Polish Protestantism was Jan Lansky. He was a great Calvinist, but then who had to flee from Poland. Ukraine and Romania is quite different. In Ukraine, they were facing the reformers as they went, because you see the primary focus most of the time of the Reformation in the West was the Catholic Church. Now, when they go to the East, when they go to the eastern part where the Orthodoxy was strong, sometimes they were found they didn't know what to believe. Some of the theology, obviously, of the Orthodox Church matched with their doctrine. So they were thinking there are similarities. Obviously, when it comes then to icons and when it comes, to the rituals in the church, that's where they had some of the problems with. But even in there, people like Luther, he would not have so many strong opposition towards some of the rituals of the church. So Calvinism was quite spread, and it occupied just a western part of Ukraine. One of the main impact, I believe, that Reformation had in Ukraine was the teaching, the strong teaching that the Reformers had, or their request for the strong separation or a clear separation between church and state. Now, that was something that was quite unknown and quite courageous, I should say, particularly in an Orthodoxy world where they are inseparable. You cannot separate one another. You are an Orthodox, therefore you are A or B or C of nationality. So now they were requesting the clear separation of church and state, and I think that opened up some of the doors for the reformers or for a new thinking to penetrate into the population who were already tired with what they would call the tyranny of the church. Another problem, I think, in there was when the war broke between the Swedes and the Ukrainians. I think this is where the Protestants made a serious mistake. They started supporting the Swedes, and as a result, then they lost the trust of the people, of the nation. And that helped with the decline of, or the loss of Protestantism in Ukraine. And here's another world, totally different world now, in different parts of the world. And obviously, the reformers, or better say, Protestants those days, they were called. Now, we are talking same people who are fought against in countries like Hungary. Now, Vatican calls them to help the Roman Empire or the Christians, or whatever you call it, in their fight against Islam. Now, Luther is receiving some of these, some of the requests, and here, this is where I put that quote from him. He says, "No help without even a concession when it is fighting the Turks." Now, as I said earlier on, Luther used to believe that actually God is allowing the Turks or the Ottomans to spread in the Balkans because of what they are doing to the Protestants in Hungary. And then, therefore, he is not willing to fight against the Turks, against the Ottomans. The problem is, he changed his mind when the Turks started attacking Germany. Then he changed his mind again. Now, in the second half of the 16th century, the Christians use Ottomans against each other. Bosnia is a typical example. Spain is a typical example, and so is Hungary. And now, in Bosnia, for instance, you know, the Ottomans actually are invited by the Orthodox Church to come and crash any of the sectarian spreading of what they called, you know, Reformation. So these are some of the three typical cases. Spain and the Balkans, Bosnia in particular, and Hungary are the three cases where Christians, you know, are calling actually on. We'll have the question and answers that. You know, they are invited to come and crash any of the reformers, and in here, you know, one of the typical cases is later on what we know as Bogomils, you know, which, I don't know, you may have your own opinion of who they were, what they taught, and so on, but certainly the spreading of the teaching of the Bogomils in the Balkans was totally crashed by the Ottomans. As I said, in the Balkans, as a result of all of this, Reformation comes much later, and actually it comes a couple of hundred years later. We've just celebrated the 500th anniversary, but frankly, of the European Reformation in the Balkans. But frankly, last year we only celebrated the 200th anniversary, for instance, of the Reformation among the Albanians, which means that 300 years were perplexing centuries of the Balkans during pretty much on the same time, like you would have Christoforidi, the Albanian figure of a translation of the Bible. You know, among the Serbian population, you would have Vuk Karadžić, who was helping with the translation of the Bible, and all of that together with the help of the British and Foreign Bible Society. So really, it comes very late, and it's interesting enough. All these centuries on, you know, when the British and Foreign Bible Society decides to come to the Ottoman world, you know, they established this center, you know, where else? In Istanbul, and then from there trying to influence the other nations. There were, which some of them didn't even know. They didn't exist as a nation, as a separate nation, but just all of that Ottoman Empire. But frankly, they had their own language, they had their own traditions, they were their own, you know, different nationalities within the Ottoman Empire. In there, as I said, waves of Reformation have come. Obviously, now, that was covered, you know, Reformation then, and now, to me, the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, it's very interesting in the evangelicalism or in the evangelical world. This 500th anniversary was celebrated, you know, with lots of pros and cons. You know, how much are we Protestants and how much are we Reformers? You know, different nations, still a different mentality. Are we, you know, actually, are we the extension of the form of the Reformation, Luther, and so on? If so, what do we have in common with them? If so, what do we agree with all their teaching? And all of these debates going on within the evangelicalism during the last year, it was, in my opinion, yes, I always agree that, you know, there should be discussions and there should be presentations, but a waste of time and waste of energy in a wrong place. Whereas, you know, the truth is that the evangelicalism and all the waves now, different waves of Reformation which are coming, you know, they all are part of the same of the same root, and they've just grown into. You know, I very often when people ask me what I am, I say I'm a Protestant, and then though some others they kind of tend to know more. You know, Protestant what? You know, and then I say I'm evangelical, and then oh good, and evangelical what? So if they want to know more, you know, then I say I'm a Pentecostal, and and what is that? I say that's these are you know, waves of Reformation. And we are just continuing. We are on the same stream. And as a matter of fact, I say it very, very openly, it's the same stream of the main Reformation continuing.